Okay, so I wanted to continue what we started. We were in the middle of going through the sugya of the minig for women, married women, to shave their heads. Now, we mentioned the overall, just to recap where we were holding, we mentioned the overall Tsarist Xeris regarding clothing, regarding hair. We mentioned the different mahalchim, the different gedalim, different tracks that different gedalim took in dealing with these Xeris. We also mentioned that by the time the later Gedolei HaPoskim were on the scene, such as the Shah Ephraim, the Chasam Sefer, and others, this minig was certainly widely enough known that they referenced it in their Chuvas. Obviously, it was widely enough known that Tsar Nikolai felt the need to go after it. In Yirchshir, we mentioned that there are different kehillas that adhere to this minig, there are different kehillas that don't adhere to this minig, and we were trying to kind of date and source where this Takana minig Zera started from. We mentioned the school of thought that says that it comes from the Vadar Baratzis. We mentioned some of the possible difficulties with that Mahalach, being the Gedolei HaPoskim who all to some degree interacted with Vadar Baratzis, don't quote this minig. Additionally, we don't have good sources to show this minig from that time period. So I just wanted to go through some of the various different rationales that are given for this minig, and see if we can make what we can make of them. So now, be'ikr, if we would be able to find, a Gemara or something like that that's maskir this minig, or that makes reference to this minig, that would be very helpful for giving this minig, the highest level of cheshivas. Now, lemaisa, we do have to keep in mind that the Gemara in Brachis on Daf Chav Daled, when it handles the sugi of Sar Bisha Erva, the Gemara in Ksubis, in regards to the dinam of Kisei HaRosh for a woman, for a married woman, for a single woman, inside the house, outside the house, the dinam in the Gemara in Nida regarding Chatzitza and Chafifas, the Gemara in Nazir, the Gemara in Shabbos in regards to what a woman's allowed to carry as far as hair accessories. There's many Gemaras that reference a woman's long hair, a woman's hair, consequential enough that it has nafkaminas l'din in all these contexts. So it seems pretty clear that B'yimei Chazal, in the earlier Tkufa, it was not this minig for married women to shave their heads. Now, there are two potential, points that are made, that are brought down by different Svarim as Makairis, and I'll just share them because they're interesting, even if they're very inconclusive. The first one is that the Gemara in Yuman, a famous Gemara, the Gemara in Yuman, Dafim Zayin, brings the story of Kimchis. Now, Kimchis was a woman who was zeichet to have 7 children, 7 sons of hers, serve as Kehanim Gedalim. And the Gemara says they asked Kimchis, what particularly meritorious act did you do that allowed you this privilege of having 7 sons serve as the Kehanim Gedalim? And she said the reason is the beams of my house never saw my hair. And this is a Gemara. There's a Zayar, I believe the Chafetz Chaim brings this down in several places, possibly even in Mishabura. I think even Mishabura in Hilchos Kriyishma, Seminayin Hey, I think the Mishabura brings down the Zayar that says Shanas Harris, in covering her hair, Tizke Labanim Tzadikim, will be Zeichet Labanim Tzadikim, will Bailam Isbarach, and her husband will be gebenched, Ba'oisher, B'banim, B'nei Banim, and Lahapach, the Zayar says if someone's not Nizar, then Chalila the opposite. So this is brought down that the schus for a person, for a woman, being very Nizar, in covering her hair and making sure that her hair is not seen by people, and at times when it's not supposed to be, is that she'll have phenomenal children like you see by Kimchas. So it's brought down in I forgot which sefer now, but in a sefer that's quoted in this Tzavos B'Dar Chassid that I was quoting from last time. So it's brought down that he says as follows: it's impossible that Kimchas could have testified that the walls of her house never saw her hair. If she had hair, it would be impossible. How is it possible that a woman could live in a home with with all the necessities of living in a home, and her hair would never be revealed to her house? It's impossible. Muzdach Zaini says that it means she used to shave her hair like this minig, and therefore the walls of her house never saw her hair. Now the problem with this is that, first of all, okay, it's a tiny bit revisionist, because meaning we have many other Chazals that say that a woman did have long hair, which would tell us that clearly the minig hanaflitz, the regular normal thing, even by anashim chashuv, even by regular chashuv people, was to have long hair. And even if perhaps you could learn this Gemara to mean that Kimchas herself was makbet to shave her hair, it would have been a very one-off occurrence. It would have been something very unique to her. Now the bigger problem is that I believe Taisus Yishanim in Yuma Afanart says, Taisus Yishanim teaches the Gemara and says that whenever her hair was not supposed to be seen, it wasn't seen. That would do away with the whole diak. Meaning the way Tais Yishanim is learning the Gemara doesn't mean it in a conclusive, chad mashma'i, like never ever ever. It means never ever inappropriately was my hair seen. But of course, in the normal life cycle where her hair had to be seen, her hair was seen. So l'chayr, that Gemara is not a strong raya to a makar for this. There's elsewhere there's a medrash that's brought as a raya. There's a medrash in Shir Hashirim that talks about the minig of certain women, that when their hair would get long, it's a medrash in Shir Hashirim Rabbah, it says Kad Cyrus Sagin Hiavdala Galshin, which means when her hair gets long, she makes karachim, she cuts off the hair. Now again, that's very inconclusive. It doesn't say shaving the head, it doesn't say at what length. It's a very vague tzushtel. I even saw in others that they say that it's not a tzushtel at all. It doesn't even mean that. There's other taichin her learn the medrash. It could be that she braids her hair instead of cutting her hair. So again, that medrash is very inconclusive to bring a raya to the makar of this. So it could be assumed upon him that there is no real makar from Yemei Chazal to such a minig. Now, I neglected to mention this. I'll just mention this now. Ramesh Shtarmach in a tshuva, where Shtarmach happens to write, and this differentiates him from, let's say, from Menashe Klein and from the others that we were quoting earlier. Ramesh Shtarmach writes that V'chein be'Ashkenaz Russia v'Lita lo shemanu me'olam mehem and hagaklal. So he writes that this minig was like bifurcated, meaning it's not a minig. The way Menashe Klein and the Kleisenberger were saying, it seems like this minig is something that was widely accepted by all Jews in Ashkenaz, Russia, Ukraine, etc. And Navas, it fell into disuse at a later date. The way Ramesh Shtarmach is writing it is that it was never even fully accepted in most of those areas, and it was only accepted in a very limited amount of areas, maybe Poland, which would imply that it has to do with Hasidim, like we said over from Shaul Brach, Hungary, which again would imply it has to do with Hasidim. So Ramesh Shtarmach in Chelik Beis and Shuas Van Argus and Siman Tafresh Tzadik Beis, he says this, that there's a bifurcation. This minig was not accepted by all different Kreis in Klal Yisrael. It was a more select group of Klal Yisrael that accepted this minig. Now, be that as it may, so we're in the middle of trying to sort out the Makaris here. So I would think it's relatively safe to say that Mechazal, this was not the minig. The minig was not Mechazal for women to shave their head. So what is the minig? What are better Makaris for the minig? So the first, and what to me seems the most primary of the reasons, to you it seemed like the most negay of the reasons, is very, very straightforward, meaning not that any Bezdin, not that the Vadar Baratzis, not that this was a top-down Zera that was founded by Paiskim, in which case you should expect to see it in some of the Paiskim. But this is what the Tzemach Tzedek says. The Tzemach Tzedek in Even Ezer, in Simon Kuf Lamed Tes, he says as follows. He says, Ayin b'Gemara Perak b'Mem Adlikin, Perak b'Mem Isha, I'm sorry, Kamamina levushim leveshes kadesh leiskalo seira. How many different hair coverings and layers a woman wears so that her hair shouldn't become revealed? Ha'echad kipa shel tzemer. One is a woolen cap. Another layer. And then he continues. There's more. He says, see how many layers Chazal talked about when Chazal described the hair coverings that women were wearing in their heads. So therefore, says the Tzemach Tzedek, mistama, the reason is just so that a woman should be certain, meaning as follows: since Bimei Chazal, women had their hair covered in many, many more layers, but in the modern era, that's not how they cover their hair anymore. So there's makam to be chayshish, that if a woman would have long hair, some of it could potentially come out and she could be nichshel in not being mechas her hair properly. So says the Tzemach Tzedek that, and this is brought down in other places, that memela they were makabel to cover their to shave their hair, so that they don't have this concern anymore. I mean, even sarbi sha'arva, so they makabel themselves to cover it in this way, so that there shouldn't be any sar that's popping out. Now, to me, it would seem that if that was true, if that's the rationale for it, and this is brought down in a sefer called Kedushas Yisrael from a Mekubal in Yerushalayim, Rabbi Akiva Parosh, and the Tzemach Tzedek makes mention of it in his way, and the Ritz Shinsky mentioned similarly, is that this minig was something that was accepted, I would almost venture to say accepted by the women upon themselves. From a woman who decided that there was a chashash, that their hair could become visible and they could be nichshel in not covering their hair properly, took it upon themselves to cover their hair in this manner so that they shouldn't be nichshel in this way. Now, okay, if that's the case, then this is a minig that was Nashim Tzidkanis took this minig upon themselves, and it has whatever amount of validity it has. It's hard to say exactly. Maybe Taka women should continue to adhere to their mother's minhagim, meaning to go back, meaning a woman who comes from an area where they used to have this minig, and then the minig fell into disuse. Maybe she does have some sort of reason to go back. But again, it's something that was more grassroots, more decided by women themselves in an effort to be machmer themselves than it was decided by the rabbinic elite to make such exera, based on this rationale. Now, a second and equally likely rationale that could be given, and this is again brought down in different svarim. And if one wants to see a full walkthrough of all the svarim that make mention to this takana and the different rationales that are given, you can take a look in the Czar Paiskim's edition of Tzavas Rida Chassid in Tzava Mem Ches. Towards the end, he has like a 10-page kuntras. That's more or less where I'm culling all this information from. So in other, I think in the Shulchan Ha'ezer and other svarim, it's brought down the reason is tam that so that a woman shouldn't be too orangutan in her hair and making it beautiful, and being busy with it and perhaps being nichshel with it, like in a play on the Gemara in Saita, that the Gemara in Saita says her hair is one of the things that are used lavera. So again, in a woman being machmer upon herself to give some sort of extra shmira or chumra to dealing with her hair. So a woman were medaktik and machmer to shave off the hair instead of keeping it long. They would shave it off, so they shouldn't come to be nichshel in any one of these in any one of these averis that can come from their hair. And there's many different svarim that make mention to this. Okay, but again, it's somewhat unconvincing. It's not something that would be top down gzeira. It's something more that women upon themselves, b'chalasar vasar, wherever they were, took on this chomer upon themselves. Now, another reason that's given, and this is brought down in different svarim, is there's a zayar in Parshas Nasai that seems to say that any hair that hahu nukva, it says boy l'sapra sayra kadasi l'zdavga b'duchra. That's what the zayar says. Now, what the implication of this is, and this is brought down in different svarim, is that any hair that grows during the Yimei Tumah, and this possibly includes nails also, hair and nails that grow during the Yimei Tumah while a woman is asal l'bayla, are considered tamei, and before she becomes mutal l'bayla, she needs to shave them off. Now, there is a minig in among some Sfardim, I don't know if it's maybe Moroccans, I'm not sure exactly which ones, that are makbid to shave off all the Cyrus Haguf before they go to the mikveh, for this reason, that the sar that grows during the Yimei Tumah is considered tamei, and it needs to be shaven off. Now, but that is not a minig that's widely accepted, and it's certainly not accepted by the kehilas that shave their hair off. So, to use that as a makar for the reason why women from these kehilas would shave off their hair, married women would shave off their hair, but it doesn't stem with the whole interpretation of the Zayar, is again a little bit lacking. That's all, a little bit lacking, that it doesn't seem to be conclusive enough, doesn't seem to stem enough with the Gzeira in its modern interpretation. Now, there's another rationale that's brought down for this minig. This is brought down again from Rav Akiva Parush, I mentioned last time, and it's quoted in other places. Rav Hillel Kalamaya, Rav Hillel Lichtenstein, Talmud Chasam Sefer, in his Sefer, Mikri Dardiki quotes it. Chasam Sefer really makes mention of it almost in his tshuva that we mentioned last time, and that's as follows: is that we're not going into too much detail. The din is that when a woman is teivel in the mikveh to become tar from being a nida, she needs to be teiveles with all of her hair. Every single strand of hair needs to be under the water as well. And in the Paiskim, there's a lot of rate about this because it's difficult. Hair is buoyant, and it's difficult to make sure that every hair is under the mikveh when a woman is being tevelis. And therefore, there are different eitzes that are given, and I'm not going to get too much into the detail. What type of hair ties could be used that don't themselves create a chatzitza, and there's much ink in the Paiskim to exactly say how this should be done. And I think by us, the minig is that there's a mikveh lady who oversees this to make sure that the hair is under the water. And this is an old minig that's brought down in the Paiskim already. So this is something that was attended to by the Paiskim in great detail. But say some achreinim that since lemaisa the chash of hair not going under the water and creating a problem for the tefillah when a woman when she's a nida, that's why married women are makbid to shave off their hair. Now, again, misham, where you attempt to bring the raya from is l'chayr the raya fakert, because there's a tremendous amount of raid in the Paiskim that's discussing this exact shaila of how to be tevelis with hair, and this ranges from all the Paiskim, from Chazal through the Rishayim, through the Achronim, through the Nesikalim, the Shulchan Aruch, through modern day Paiskim, and everybody's busy giving eitzes of how to be tevelis, where clearly you see that they're not saying that the halach is you have to shave your hair, that the minig is to shave your hair. Shia, this is a makar that's given. Now, I rather saw something interesting. The Chasam Sofer that we mentioned last time in Simon Kuf Tzadik Vav in Yeridea, the Chasam Sofer is handling the minig. There's a minig that's brach that a woman, when she goes to her chassan, has to go with a full head of hair. And it's based on the Gemara in Ksubis that says a kala is yoitza behinuma v'resha perua. So a kala is supposed to go out with a full head of hair to greet her chassan. Now, because of that, there was a minig that even in the Kehilas where they were going to ultimately shave off all the hair tomorrow, meaning the day after the chuppah, at least to the chuppah, they would go with a full head of hair. Now, the Chasam Sofer in his tshuva is writing that he says minig Yisrael Torah, that this minig of going with Resha Perua and a full head of hair is a heilig minig, and therefore, even though it seems to come at the expense of shaving off the hair in a timely manner, which seems to have major implications in regards to these other concerns that we're mentioning, still the hayos minig Yisrael Torah, and the minig is that a kala goes with the Resha Perua and Hinum of Resha, so a kala should still go like that, and she'll shave off her hair tomorrow morning. Now, Rav Hillel Kolamaya in his sefer, he argues with this, and he says hayos this tam, he's going with this tam. Hayos this tam of it being a problem with the tefillah is so relevant. The fact that the hair might be buoyant and stay above the water is such a relevant, problematic reason, and because of that, the minig is that all women shave their hair. Says he thinks that it's worth suspending the minig, which is based on the Gemara in Ksubas, which is based on the Chazal, that a kala goes up Resha Perua, she goes over full head of hair. It's worth suspending that minig in the modern era and saying no, that you should shave the hair even before the chasana. And he says why? The reason he says is because women are much less mechonach in going to the mikveh now, because back in the day, Mechazal, even pnuyas would go to the mikveh, even girls who were unmarried would go to the mikveh. So he says they would have much more experience in how to be tailored properly and how to go to the mikveh properly. Therefore, we were able to falazach that they were going to have a proper tefillah, and we could be makbid on the minig of Resha Perua, even though we were going to shave off the hair tomorrow, which again is a little bit of an untruth, because Bimei Chazal they didn't do this at all. But take it at face value. Be able to do that. But Bisman Hazeh, when we're in busy cities where the tefillah has to happen quickly and the mikveh has to happen quickly, and the girls are very inexperienced in going to the mikveh, there's much more makom to be machmer, and therefore he says you should be machmer, not like his Rebbe the Chasam Sofer, and they should shave off the hair the day before the wedding. Now, other reasons that are given is because of schita besar. In the event that a woman will go to the mikveh on Shabbos and her hair will be wet, there could be a schita problem. So if she doesn't have hair, she doesn't have that problem. Others reasons are given because of lice or bugs that could be in the hair, which is again could be a chatzitza problem. So be it as it may, there's 7, 8 reasons that are different, that are brought down in different farm to validate this minig. And based on these 7, 8 different reasons, some poskim, Rav Nasha Klein and others conclude that anybody who comes from any area that was under the imprimatur of the Vada Baratzis needs to go back to this minig. Clearly, that is not the minig amongst Yotzei Lita and Yotzei Russia, or Yekes and Chadema. And I think the rationale being that the sourcing for this minig is taka much more vague and suspect than it's being presented, and therefore it's not as old of a minig or as chashiv as a minig to in these kehilas as it is to those. So far be it from me to choose, one over the other. I'm just saying each kehila has its legs to stand on, has its rationale to go with over here, and in Nara Pashte, everyone will do what their mothers and grandmothers and rabbanim and etc. say. But Yeshia, this is a little bit of the reasons and the rationales that are given for this minig, just as a hashlama from last week's discussion. Okay, thank you.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.